More than 6 million people ordered to evacuate across Florida. That is one of the largest evacuations in U.S. history, with more than 25% of the state's population ordered to evacuate. About 75,000 are riding out the storm in government-sponsored shelters today. Republican Florida Congressman Ron DeSantis joins us now, and you have referred to this storm, Congressman, thank you for joining us, as mammoth. And the ramifications, I don't believe every Floridian truly understand. Why don't you explain to our viewers why this storm needs to be taken so seriously?
Well, if you compare this to Hurricane Andrew, which is kind of the most famous one, Andrew's like a postage stamp compared to this in terms of the size. This thing, I think, will probably be as strong as Andrew by the time it goes over some of the warm waters in the Florida Strait. And the way it's currently tracking, going in southwest Florida and then moving up that coast, that's a very vulnerable part of our state. It's interesting. They've consistently moved this track further west. I left Washington early in the middle of the week to get down here. We were thinking it was an East Coast storm.
Yep.
I have an East Coast district. And you had people, the Florida Turnpike, 95, people are getting out of Dodge. Many people even went to the west coast of Florida. I actually thought about telling my wife and our daughter, hey, why don't you go stay with my parents who live in the Tampa Bay area. Now you have the opposite. So it's been a bit of a whiplash, but that current trajectory of the storm is going to do some significant damage. And I just think that people need to heed the orders of their local emergency managers and just don't take any chances with this thing.
When it comes to Irma, here is the biggest fear, okay, the storm surge. It's the biggest killer along the coast. In fact, Irma's got freshwater flooding. That appears to be actually the least significant factor because storm surge, wind damage, those are the two greatest hazards here. So you need to take a look at these coastal areas. And it's not just the west coast. I think a lot of people on the east coast kind of think that they're in the clear because this thing has been sort of clocking westward. But in fact, the way that this hurricane works, that storm surge is going to be potentially deadly. I mean, it's life-threatening storm surge we're talking about here. Are the shelters at this point at full capacity? Is it too late for people to evacuate if they want to get out now?
It's not too late. There are some shelters that are at capacity. It just depends on which county you are and the circumstances. But listen to the governor. There are numbers that if you don't know where to go, you can call the number and they will help you do that. You got to do it soon, though, because once this storm really hits, you're not going to be able to call 911, have people go out in 120-mile-an-hour winds and save you. So do it now. You can do it. And you're right, Julie, about the storm surge. I mean, when you start talking about potentially 10, 15 feet in places like southwest Florida, you're talking about 7 to 10 feet in Tampa. Tampa Bay is just a bunch of water, around the whole area. And so that is community after community could be affected by that. And when that stuff starts happening, there's really nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. It's just very, very devastating.
Something that's been incredibly confusing, first of all, tracking the storm. It has just been really tough for meteorologists to tackle ever since it went through the Caribbean. But those evacuees that actually heeded the warnings, especially in the Miami Beach area, many of them headed north-northwest. So they all went to Tampa. And now all the people in Tampa are being told basically they're going to be bearing the brunt of this. What do you say to the people that actually did heed the warnings and now they've actually evacuated to areas that are in a greater threat area?
Now, look, I think it's very frustrating for them. Yes, you had people evacuate to Tampa. You also had people flying from Miami to Atlanta. Well, guess what? If you're in Georgia, you're going to probably get this later in the week. Now, not as severe as South Florida, but it's going to be a significant storm. So that's just kind of the way the cookie crumbles. You got to look at the forecast and make your decision, but there's no doubt about it that whether it was a bad forecast or whether these things just naturally change, I don't know. But yes, there are people running ragged around our state trying to get away from it and then end up doing the right thing and then having to move again.
Okay, and what about government assistance for all those people who go to return to their homes and find nothing there? What happens to them?
Well, that's going to depend on the circumstances. Obviously in Florida, a lot of these homes require you to have some type of flood insurance. That's something that the federal government is involved in, hasn't necessarily been successfully involved in, but the claims are going to go through that the federal flood insurance program. Most of those homes, there's going to be significant wind damage, so the homeowner's insurance is going to cover the wind damage, but you got to have the flood for the storm surge. So it's just going to depend on the circumstances. And then obviously we're going to get in there. The locals are going to get in. The state people are going to get in. FEMA's going to get in once this thing passes, and really try to make sure everyone's okay, and then start the recovery process. It's going to be difficult, but we're going to get it right.
Okay, and FEMA has pre-positioned people as well, basically thinking that the storm, you had said, was maybe going to run up the east coast of Florida, but nonetheless, FEMA's there, they're ready. Emergency personnel cannot actually get to these people, though, in order to save anyone who did not heed the warnings. So I read somewhere that if the winds exceed 45 miles per hour, which at this point, that's the case in the Keys, for example, nobody can come help you. So at this point, if you didn't evacuate, it's too late from at least the Keys.
Yeah. And it's hard for you to get out because if you're a lot of these areas, you got to go over bridges. And guess what? Once the winds start to get 45, 50, 60 miles an hour, a lot of the bridges will just be shut down. You just may not even be able to go, even if you want to go. So now is really the time. If you're in that southern Florida area, if you're in Tampa, you got to make your plans and make your decisions. And then one other thing, Julie, that we've been hearing about, all these local communities and the shelters, they will have arrangements for your pets. There have been really terrible reports about people just leaving their pets behind, and we can't have that. You got to take care of our pets.
I'm really glad you touched on that as well. Republican Florida Congressman Ron DeSantis, thank you very much for talking to us as always.
Thank you.